like to talk about what qualifies me to be here. Whose hands are you in? Because I take great care and responsibility in making sure I'm giving a good message. So I started my career here in the Twin Cities at a big company called Deluxe. If you've been around a while, you've heard of them. And then I moved on to a company called eFunds, which was a spinoff of Deluxe. And it was there that I had my introduction to Agile. So it was kind of by accident that we got started, but it's been a wild ride, and I would never go back. It's just an awesome way to work, I think, and hopefully after this time together, you'll have some good feelings about it, too. So after I left eFunds, I went out and became a consultant and worked for a couple of different firms. And now I'm actually on my own. I work for a consulting firm that I own. So I'm a one-woman shop, but I kind of like it. So that's a little bit about me. All right. So the big talk is, what is Agile and why is everybody talking about it? And it's a little bit hard to prepare for something like this because I don't always know the experience in the room. In fact, when I do my training classes, I always want to know, what the knowledge level is in the room. And I have no idea where you're coming from. So you all might be in different places in terms of your knowledge. Hopefully I can try to appeal to everybody with this. But it's a new way of working. And I say new, but it's been around for quite a while. But it's surprising to me that there are still several places of employment who don't know anything about it. So even though it's been around for over a decade, in many organizations we don't know what it is and it's brand new to us. So it's a new way of working, and basically what it means is we use small teams. These small cross-functional teams come together, and they're typically building something. Most often we think of it as software. Software projects is usually what we think of. But it's expanded beyond that, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. So a team coming together to build something. They work autonomously, so we have very little management involved with the team. Doesn't mean management isn't important, and I'll talk to you about that, but in terms of working with the team, we want the team to be independent and working on their own. They work very closely with somebody that we'll call the customer. If you've been around Agile before, you might know the name of that being product owner. So whether it's an internal customer or an external customer, doesn't really matter. What we're talking about is the requester of the work that's being done. So in my mind, the requester is the customer. So let's keep it kind of loose for now. It might be different in your organization compared to somebody else's, but that's okay. The thing is, when we have that customer coming to the table, working on the same team with the regular team that's doing all the building of the work, whatever it is, that customer's key responsibility is to feed the team the work. And they do that by putting the work in priority order. That's one really neat thing about Agile is that we try to work in a fashion where we're always working on the highest value items first. So we prioritize and reprioritize and reorder the backlog all the time with inputs not only from the product owner, because it's actually their job, but the team and others who may have some dependencies and some need to say the order of our backlog. Let's see. Now, that's all really the practices, those first few bullets. But we also have new values and new principles, and we're going to be talking a lot about that as well. That's what some of the slides are built on, those kinds of ideas. So it's not easy. Of all of the different methods, Scrum is by far the most popular. I happen to be a certified Scrum trainer, so I'm a little bit biased, but it works. And so we'll be talking today primarily about what Scrum is and how Scrum works. But I think that'll be a good thing for you because Scrum is by far the most popular of all the Agile methods. So, all right, next here. What are the benefits? Why would an organization want to become an Agile organization? It's something that's really important because to get people on board with this, we have to understand what are the benefits. Why would we go through the change? Because it's not easy to do. The benefits are threefold in my mind. And we usually think of the benefits being that for the IT leadership team. This team is responsible for delivery of many different things to many different customers. And over the decades, this group of people have experienced a lot of pain and turmoil because IT departments have been the scapegoat for project failure for decades. Probably not very fair in many cases, but you know what I'm talking about. you're never on time. Every time we get the product, it's full of errors. All those kinds of issues have come up. So IT leadership has been looking for a better way to get work done, and they certainly benefit. Another group that benefits, though, and even more so in my mind, is the customer. And I tell my classes all the time, don't forget about the customer. In fact, in my experience, it's the customer who benefits even more than technology. But see, because technology is the group that's looking for ways to do it better, everybody assumes that Agile is an IT thing. And certainly it impacts the IT team a lot, but the biggest beneficiaries of an organization switching to Agile is not IT. In my mind, it's the requester of the work, the customer. They get a lot of huge benefits. They get flexibility. For the first time ever, maybe, in your working career, we're going to have this opportunity to change requirements without a big hassle. See, I told you that IT's been the scapegoat for years and years with failed projects, people blaming and blaming, and we have this pointed fingers going back and forth between IT and let's just call them the business. And Scrum says, enough of that. We're on the same team. So now when your product person attends a trade show and they come back to the team and they say, you know what, I need to have this, we'll say, okay, gosh, this change is really awful. It's going to suck, but let's roll up our sleeves and figure it out together. In the past, it would have been IT's only power play. IT would have thrown out a card that said something like, well, that wasn't in the requirement. Have you guys heard that before? Of course, right? But think about it. It's IT's only way of protecting themselves. And so they find these ways to build this wall up. And that's craziness. We don't want this finger-pointing thing. We want everybody to see themselves as one team working together. And so this is what Agile does. It breaks down these silos. It gets everybody on one team working together. So we've got the technology leaders. We've talked about the customers. By the way, something I didn't say besides flexibility is they have visibility. We get to show them what we're building now on a fairly frequent basis. In fact, I don't know if any of you have ever been in the customer seat, but if you are, you know the feeling. It's 10 months from when you gave them the requirements, you hope you get what you think you thought you asked for. That's how it feels being in the customer's shoes. Now we say, let me show you what we've done after just 2 weeks. So the customer gets to see it on a regular basis. And that visibility into what's being built feels really reassuring to the customer. In fact, if we're building the wrong thing, we sit down with the customer and say, okay, if it's not meeting your needs, how can we change it? So it's a whole new mindset. And then another big benefit that the customer gets is this thing called predictability. And I would have to train you on a whole bunch of different concepts to show you how Agile teams are quite predictable. But in a nutshell, what happens is we deliver in the same amount of time over and over and over. So let's just pretend it's 2 weeks. Every 2-week time frame, we start to measure how much work the team is getting done. And then what that does for us is it helps us become more predictable. We can kind of see where the team is headed, and then we can say when it looks like we might be done. So the customer benefits, you've heard that. Of course, we know IT leadership benefits. That's why they're bringing this in-house. But we can't forget about the people. And to be quite honest with you, that's the group I care about the most. The people benefit immensely from changing your company into an Agile culture. And the reason why is for the first time ever, they have a real say in what's going on. They're accountable not because somebody's telling them, you're accountable for this. It's because they want to take that accountability. And they want to take the accountability because for the first time, this group of professionals is being listened to. They're being heard. And so it really benefits the people as well. And sometimes it's really sad to me when I see the people are the holdouts. They're the ones that are laughing about Agile, and they're crossing their arms like it's not going to work. And I think if they only knew that they're going to have huge benefits from working in this kind of culture. My daughter, I have 2 of them. One of them has been to my Scrum Master class 3 times, twice as a student and once as a young professional in her first year. And she turned to me at one point and said, Mom, who wouldn't want to work in a Scrum environment? So this is a millennial for you, understanding, of course, people want their voices heard. But those of us who have been working for a few decades, maybe it's not as obvious to us that we should be listened to. So there are a lot of benefits that all the groups get, not just IT leadership. So we have to make sure everybody understands that and we get everybody on board. There are also plenty of benefits outside of technology. For example, this has moved beyond just software development. Now, actually, Scrum started in manufacturing. It moved to software development. That's where the big push has been for a long time. And then it started to move beyond that. And I believe it goes back to an article that was entitled Scrum in the Church. Here's what happened. The creator of Scrum, there's two gentlemen, but the one I'm going to talk about right now, his name is Jeff Sutherland. And Jeff Sutherland was doing a lot of work in organizations trying to transform them into a Scrum way, an agile method. And what happened was his wife came to him and said, Jeff, I see all the progress you're making out there in your IT industry with all your IT customers. What about me, where I work? We have the same problems that you're talking about. Our organization has too many projects up and running, and nobody knows what the priorities are. Not only that, because we have so many projects up and running, all of our people are spread too thin. We can't possibly be productive in this kind of environment. There's too many decision makers pushing on all these teams. And she said to him, won't you help me? Does anybody know what Arlene Sutherland's line of business was? Anybody read her article? She was an ordained minister. And she knew that her organization, the church, had the same issues, even though they weren't producing software. So Scrum, while it's an agile method, has really nothing to do with software development. It's people management, project management, and process management. And she needed help fixing the projects in her church. My husband and I, when we built a house without a builder, we applied many Scrum concepts. Now, I was relatively new to it at the time, so trying to get my husband on board with this was a little bit tricky. But it worked. We had our Johnson family backlog where everything was prioritized and ordered, and we worked with the contractors as they came in and helped us figure out, what could be done simultaneously, what had a dependency. So let's not get too hung up on Scrum being just for software. And here's some examples as well. NPR, they're using Scrum to come up with new programming. This winery, Mission Bell Winery, they're not only using it for warehousing and production, the C-level executives have decided to really understand Agile. Let's ourselves work as a Scrum team. Let's prioritize our work. Let's quit working in silos and have our work be together in one backlog, and one of us will be responsible for issues. Saab, I don't know if anybody's ever read any of the articles that are about Lockheed Martin, and I'm not one to talk negatively about companies, but if you've ever read anything, they're on a 10-year project where they're trying to produce fighter jets for our country. And this 10-year project has cost the United States billions of dollars, and they have yet to produce us one fighter jet. Meanwhile, Saab, their competitor, is producing many fighter jets at a fraction of the cost, and they're using Scrum. They've got a Scrum trainer there helping them out. So John Deere, I've been down there actually. They're using Scrum to create machines in manufacturing. And sure, some of the machines have software in there, but it's not all about software. We think about it, and that's where it started, so that's where we tend to go, but it's way bigger than that. If you have small children, you can even use Scrum in the home. There's a YouTube video. I think if you Google Agile in the Family, you could probably find it.
Probably a joke.
What's that?
Probably a joke.
No, it's cool. What it is let's say, for example, your family decides you want to go to the zoo in the afternoon on a Saturday. To get yourselves there, you have to get all your chores done. So you create a family backlog, and you sit down as a team, and everybody decides what they're going to do. And if the 4-year-old picks washing the floor, you just let it go. And the 4-year-old will do his or her best, but that's how they contribute to our family goal. So there's a lot of ways that this can be applicable outside of just IT. That's where it started, though, so that's primarily what we're going to be thinking about. All right. Why does it fail? If Scrum is so great, why does it fail? It fails primarily because of leaders. And if you're a leader in the room, I'm promising you, I'm not attacking you. It's just that you've got a lot going, and often leaders don't take the time to understand what it really is. They've read the benefits, they've read articles, they know that it's something worth trying, but then we fall into our old habits. And so leaders lack training, and they don't really understand what approach we should be taking. They're not bad people. The leaders who want to bring Scrum in just struggle because they don't really know what it means. In addition, they mistakenly manage in the same way that they've always been used to, a more command and control style for leadership. And when that happens, that management style actually inhibits the development we need to make, moving toward an empirical process, or one where the team has more decision-making power. This one, leaders continuously launch too many initiatives. What I mean by that is we've got, just like the Arlene Southern was talking about in her church, too many projects up and running, and nobody really understands which one is the highest priority. You may or may not be aware, but the idea of multitasking is dying. Not fast enough, in my opinion. But what we're saying is multitasking doesn't work. Pulling people from one project to the next doesn't work. And we need to stop doing that. We need to say, these are our top 3 initiatives. If we have enough staff for a 4th one, let's do it. But we have to quit spreading people too thin, which is exactly what this last bullet is. I have an example, you guys, where I experienced this firsthand in one of my coaching gigs. I was on site at a company that had 5 Scrum teams up and running. They'd been at it for a while, but they weren't completely successful yet. They also had a handful of waterfall teams that were still going. And the CEO and I sat down together, and he said, I need to understand why Scrum isn't working. So we had these regular sessions. And after about 3 weeks, I was sitting with him, and I said, wow, this team here, they are knocking the ball out of the park. Every single time they deliver, their customer's happy. They're the only team that has a happy product owner. So we talked about that. And he said, Lonnie, I'm having a really hard time believing that that one particular team is the one that's successful. And I asked why, and he said, well, here's the deal. When we started these teams, we initially started with 4 teams. Those 4 teams got our A-level players. All the rock stars in the company went to those 4 teams. We weren't even going to do the 5th project, but we had some leftover people, some B squad, JV players that didn't quite make the cut for the important projects. So they thought, what the heck? They put those people on this 5th initiative. Not only that, they had a project manager who was fairly weak. They put her in the Scrum Master role. And just a side note, project management and Scrum Mastering are very different skill sets. So she may have been a weak project manager, but she was really doing a great job as a Scrum Master. So here's this one team made up of people who apparently were lesser skilled than everybody else, was the only team that was having success. And we talked about why and what was going on, and it became very clear. Those 4 teams with the rock stars, well, those people were so important, most of them were on more than one project. Those people were so important, not only were they on a Scrum project, they also had commitments in those waterfall projects. Not only that, when the sky is falling and the Step 1 issues came in, who do you suspect got the problems? The team with the rock stars, those 4 teams. Those people were being pulled left and right. They were constantly being interrupted. But that one little team, like the engine that could, the team with the supposedly lesser skilled people, had a happy customer, and they were cranking out work left and right. Why? It comes back, in my mind, to the idea that they left them alone to work. They were super productive because they didn't have all the distractions. So these are the kinds of things that leaders really need to understand in order to make Scrum work in their workplace. This isn't easy, though. This is hard. So let's talk about 6 ways to potentially make it better, because this is a hard thing to undertake. So leaders, while they have the best intentions, often get in the way, and it requires behavior and culture change. I get really sad as a trainer when people come to my class and they have the expectation that they're going to learn this thing called the process of Scrum, because it's so much bigger than a process, and we have to make sure everybody gets that. So we're going to share 6 tips today to help you understand potentially how we can make this work better. So as leaders, anybody in here who can influence a leader or is a leader, here are some things to be looking for. It's not anarchy. It's not this team is running off doing whatever they want. There's a lot of structure in this. So it's not that, and it also isn't, okay, do what I say, but work faster and harder. There's a company, I won't say it, but you've all heard of it. It's a company that actually does Scrum pretty well, except for their CEO is very adamant about driving his people. And it kind of backfires because I think he goes through employees a lot faster than other organizations because he doesn't quite understand that that's not really what Scrum is. So they're working in a Scrum-like fashion, but he's burning the people out. Also, this Agile Manifesto and the 12 principles that go with it. The next slide I'm going to actually show you what the manifesto is, but we have to embrace that. It's sort of like claiming you're following a religion. The one I'm most familiar with is Christianity. So I'll tell you, it's sort of like claiming you're a Christian, but not having a clue what's in your Bible. Or it's sort of like saying I'm an American, but I don't know what our Constitution is about, and I don't understand what our country stands for. You can't try to be an Agile organization without understanding the manifesto. So I'm going to pull that up in a second. Also, it comes in several varieties. So be looking for different methods. Scrum is one, but there's Kanban, Lean. Gosh, there's many different ones. Extreme programming is pretty popular. So of all of these, Scrum is by far the leader. Of all of the Agile methods, there's been studies that have been done, and Scrum is over 50% of the users that are doing Agile are using Scrum. The next highest one at one time was 11%. It was a combination of Scrum and extreme programming. So Scrum is by far the most popular of all the Agile methods, but they all have their merit. I'm not saying they're bad. All right, so what is the Agile Manifesto? Here's a picture of it. What happened is a bunch of people got tired of the way our industry was going, and they said, let's get together and fix it. So 17 people flew out to a mountainous resort in the western part of our country, and they went skiing, they drank a lot of beer, and they came up with this thing. It's true, they did. They drank a lot of beer. And they said, they went around the room and talked about all the methods everybody had been coming up with, and there was probably a lot of egos in the room. They couldn't agree on one method. But here's what they did decide. Let's call all of our methods something. Let's come up with a name for it. And the name Agile was chosen. And just in the interest of time, we're going to focus in on the center part right here. But they said, here are the things we value: individuals and interactions over process and tools. Doesn't mean we get rid of process and tools, but our people are our most important asset. When I was a young manager, I had a gentleman who I was having a one-on-one conversation with, and he said to me, I would never encourage my kids, his kids were college age, I would never encourage my kids to go into IT. This is the most pathetic profession ever. And that made me very sad. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, you know, when we tell somebody it's going to take 6 months, they say you only get 4. And when we talk about problems, it all comes back to us. And the fingers are always pointed at technology. And I experienced this firsthand. When I was a business analyst, I had to go to a training where I had to do a role play. And before I could get up and do the role play, by the way, if you ever come to one of my classes, I promise we won't do that, okay? But I had to read about my role that I had to act out in front of everybody. And as I'm reading the background of how I'm supposed to act, it says, and you're a part of IT. And everybody hates IT. I know. I thought, oh, my gosh, that's terrible. Can I please get in the popular crowd? I don't want to be in the group that everybody hates. That's how I felt. And now I've got this employee years later telling me, you know what, this is a terrible place to work. Our voices are never heard. So it is not an accident that the word individual is the first part of the manifesto. We need to value our people. Perhaps if we had for decades, we wouldn't have a shortage of technology professionals nowadays. I'm really adamant about this. It's something I really care a lot about. The next thing, working software. This just means let's build a little bit of something, get it in front of our customer, and find out, you know what? How are we doing? Is it meeting your needs? Do you like it? Do you want to tweak it? What can we do from here? Apple does this all the time, but we don't know it because their customers are internal paid people. But they put the device in front of somebody, and they watch how they're going to interact with it, and then they build from there, and then they do it again, and they do it again. Scrum is the same way. Little bit of product in the hands of the customer and find out how they're feeling. And that's more important than 25 pages of requirements that are going to change. We need to have an idea of where we're headed, but we don't have to have everything documented down to the last period. The third one on there, customer collaboration, and that's more important than contract negotiation. This means the idea of sign-offs in a company should go away. Sign-offs imply we don't trust each other. We're two sides working against each other. Now, it's different if you have an external customer. Of course, we need contracts. But internally, gosh, that's crazy. Aren't we on the same team? Why would we need sign-offs? So customer collaboration is huge. In fact, in Scrum, we believe it's so important our customer has a role. Does anybody know what they're called? Product owner, that's right. There's a special name for them. When I talk about customer or product owner or the business, I'm kind of just lumping them all in one category. So it really depends on your organization and how you work. Sometimes the end customer can be your product owner, which is great because then they're free. Or sometimes it's a business person, a marketing person. It really depends. But when I say the term customer, just know that I'm kind of lumping them all together. But working closely with them and getting them on the team is really important. And by the way, why that's important is so we can break down the finger pointing and the blame game. And then the last one, responding to change over following a plan. Sometimes people believe that Agile doesn't have planning. In Scrum, we plan all the time. Not only do we plan every time we head into a sprint, we actually do a mini plan every single day for 15 minutes. We are replanning and looking at our plans continuously. So we're not saying planning isn't important, but what we're saying is we need to be able to respond to change. If our customer attends a trade show and comes back, of course we have to get that new thing in that they just discovered is essential. So this is what the Agile Manifesto is all about. I engage you to look at this further and to pull up the 12 principles that go with it. You might recall we were talking about 6 different tips for how to make this work. So that's how we got off on this one, okay? Our second tip, understanding where Agile works best. It works in an environment where the problem is complex. Luckily, in IT, that's almost every time. It might work where we don't really have a solution. We can evolve things as we go. It works well when we can modularize our work. That's why if we have work that is more of a mainframe kind of project, it's a little bit harder to do that. So sometimes it's more difficult than others, but we try to find ways around that if we can. If we can get our customers working closely with us, that's something else that's going to be beneficial. And if we can eliminate the style of command and control leadership, that's going to work in our favor. Now you might think, well, yeah, not in our organization, but I'll tell you what, even some of the most strict command and control environments are trying to move to Agile. I've gone down to Omaha, Nebraska. You may not be aware, because I was surprised to learn, but in Omaha, Nebraska is a piece of our government that's extremely important. They predict the weather around the world for our troops. It's a bunch of former military people with a command and control background trying to use Scrum. And if they can do it, you guys can do it. It's also great outside of IT, doing some product development or working through marketing projects. I even in my class back in June was in Arizona, and out of the 20 seats in the room, 15 of them were teachers and principals, learning how they could work in a team environment using Scrum. So for them, they might use, let's say, the graduation ceremony. That would be a big project, and they would use Scrum to plan it. So try not to get too locked into the type of project because it's very flexible, can be used in many different ways. Start small. I remember getting started, and we picked just a couple of teams. In fact, there's a person in the room who I worked with, Cheryl Neeser. We picked just a couple of teams to get started so that we could see what are we doing well, where are we falling apart, how can we make this better. And so this is a really important thing. Have some kind of a pilot program. Create someone in a role called an Agile champion, someone who's a fairly senior person who can knock down impediments for you, who can talk to the leaders with a little bit of clout when they're getting in the way. Really important ideas when you're trying to move to Agile. It's best if it comes from the leaders and the executives because then we know we have their buy-in, but you're not always lucky enough to get the highest level. Some of you work at giant companies and you can't even get to those individuals. But it's really nice to start small and grow, and hopefully you have executive support. Let's see. Can you hit the button for me? There we go. Thank you. All right. You may have heard of this thing called Shuhari, depending upon your background, but this comes out of Japanese martial arts. And what this says is at the beginning, teams are going to work in what we call a shu state. This is where they're very new, and they shouldn't be changing anything at the beginning. A lot of times when I get people coming to my classes, that's the place they're going to be in when they go back to try Scrum. So it's called shu, and they shouldn't be adjusting anything. But as they evolve and grow, they're going to move into the ha state. And this is where they can start to test the waters on making some modifications. And it takes months to get there. The last one is called Re, and that's where the organization or the team understands Agile so well that they can modify any of it and not cause a lot of trouble to themselves. Sadly, and many of you might be in this boat, organizations believe they can customize it to fit their needs. We'll pick on Intertek just because it's a company we all know. And I like to say in class, they Intertekized it, meaning, oh, it's our own custom flavor of Agile. Usually a big red flag to me. And I'm not saying Intertek does that at all. It's a company we all know because we're sitting here today. And that's a very dangerous thing, is when a company doesn't really understand it and they start to customize it too early. So be aware of that. Allow the teams to master Agile at their own pace. That's a really good thing to do. Practice Agile at the top. If any of you in the room are the top-level people in your organization, awesome. Practice it at your level. If you're not, suggest to your management team, why doesn't the management group work in an Agile-like fashion? Create yourselves a department backlog, and you guys work together to prioritize it. And maybe their boss is the product owner. And when they reach impediments, who's going to knock those down for them? So if the management team is doing their work in a Scrum-like fashion, they're going to understand more about what kind of trials and tribulations the team will be going through. And that'll really help. So getting the leaders to practice this is a good thing too. And then finally, the sixth one is be aware that more teams fail than succeed, and so you need to figure out how to destroy the barriers that get in the way. It is true, more teams fail at Agile than succeed. It makes me very sad, but it's true because it's a cultural shift. That is not easy. It's hard to change the culture in an organization. So let's look at what our impediments are, and let's find a way to nail those down. Let's get them out of the way. Let's get that Agile champion in a position where he or she can help us. And finally, be aware of something called the Drucker's cuckoo effect. What that is, and it's kind of a strange name, but it's really important to know, that principle says that in an organization, when somebody is trying something new, there's antibodies in the rest of the organization that are there to defeat it. And when we have some new change coming in place, it's a natural thing for the organization to fight it. People are afraid of change. People are jealous that they're not the one on the pilot team. People are competitive. I don't want to see their success. I want my team succeeding. So whatever the reason is, it's hard to make a change. And Drucker's cuckoo effect says isolate that group from all those antibodies that are going to be fighting the change. In fact, there was an article. If you Google this, you'll find the details. But one organization said, enough, we're going to take this project team and put them all out in the desert. They were isolated from everybody so that they could finally deliver what they needed. I know it's crazy. Some of you are smiling. It's silly. But Google it. It's very interesting. So that's our sixth tip in terms of destroying the barriers that are going to get in the way. So how do we destroy the barriers? Well, 5 ideas for that. So in order to isolate, isolating was one thing, but let's get everybody on the same page. Let's make sure people are getting training on what this means. Don't just train the Scrum Master. Let's train people on the team. Let's train the product person. Get people who are going to be supporting the team going to class so they understand when we say we're working in a 2-week sprint, they understand what that means. If I need my work done before the end of the sprint, I want people to understand why that's important to us. So get people on the same page. Have everybody understand this isn't just a benefit for IT. This is a benefit for everybody. Get people on the same page. The second one, don't change structures right away. It takes a while for things to absorb into the organization. So don't change things right away. Let's say I'm a QA person. I go to join a team, and I'm going to be a QA member on that team. But I need to see myself as a team member first with a QA skill second. And I still have my QA manager. I still report to that person if I want to take vacation time or if I come in 3 hours late and I have to take PTO because I had a flat tire. I still have that boss, but that boss is not the boss of my Scrum team. The Scrum team is a standalone team. And so don't change the structure right away. Keep people reporting to where they are, and eventually when you get the hang for how this works, start to invite HR into the game. Get them into class so they understand what is this cultural shift we're going to go through. In fact, get your HR team to use Scrum to get their work done. Wouldn't that be awesome? The third thing, only one boss. We call that person the product owner. If too many people are poking at the team with all the different things they need, it's going to create a lot of confusion to the team. They're not going to understand what's important. They're not going to understand who's playing which role. So the product owner is the feeder of the team. And there are no managers making decisions for the team. We work together as a team to do that kind of stuff. So only one leader or one boss, the product owner. Let's focus on teams and not individuals. This is a hard thing, but we really need people moving in a group together. So thinking about shifting your metrics in your organization from output and utilization, which, by the way, really measures how busy people are, into more team-related type of metrics, which is business outcome and happiness. How satisfied are our people? How satisfied is the customer? Let's do surveys. That helps us understand how valuable and how engaged our people are. So think about this, focusing on teams instead of individuals. And this is going to take time, and this is where HR is going to need to get involved. And then the fifth and final one is lead with questions, not orders. So if you're a Scrum Master or you're a leader on the outside, instead of giving direction, lead with questions. We call it Socratic questioning. It comes from Socrates. One of my favorite product owners did it brilliantly. When the team would come to him and say, do you think I should do it like this or like that? He would reply with a simple statement, what do you think? And changing our mindset and getting people to think on their own can go a long way in terms of building self-organized teams. So the next slide is our summary slide. I'll just, maybe for just a couple minutes, see if there's any questions, and then I'll do the summary and we'll move on. Anybody have any questions? Yeah.
A couple, if you don't mind. The stat that you had on teams failing, do you have any stats on how many people who are going from a traditional methodology to an agile methodology actually fail? And do you know what the top 3 reasons for failure are?
The reasons for failure were the things that I listed in terms of why the management gets in the way. That's a big part of why it fails. The stat came from an article in the Harvard Business Review, and I'm not exactly sure where their source was. And I'm not a real stats person, so I can't answer completely what all the other stats are. You could, if you're a stats guy, you can start Googling and getting information about that. At the end, I do have a reference after this slide, and I mentioned a couple of articles and a couple of books that are full of information, too, that might be useful to you. Yeah. In fact, Harvard Business Review and Forbes, anything written by Jeff Sutherland or Steve Denning would be full of that kind of data. Anything else? Yes?
You talked a lot about getting buy-in from the product owner. In a scenario where your client is external and you're kind of introducing them as you're about to build them something, do you have any suggestions on how to work with that, or kind of guidelines on how to get them to buy in when you really don't have the time to
Yes. Yes. There's 3 in my class. I talk about it. It's kind of a make-believe thing, but I call it the 3 ILITY words. So when I'm trying to sell my product owner on why they should want Scrum, I say there's 3 reasons why: flexibility, visibility, and predictability. 3 huge benefits that they'll get that they wouldn't have if we stuck with a traditional waterfall kind of method. And I really want them to understand why this is important. One of the organizations I was with, when we had new leadership come in that was much more command and control and said, you know what, we're not going to do Scrum here anymore. The group that really, really wanted Scrum to stick around was the product owner group. They're saying, wait a minute, we can't see where you are anymore. And hey, what do you mean we can't change our mind on the requirements? We could when we were doing Scrum. So these benefits are quite large for the product owner. We just have to help them understand. And I have been told things like, oh, sure, you know, just go ahead, IT, shove the next flavor of the day down my throat. Last year it was Six Sigma. Next year it'll be something else. This year I'm supposed to learn Scrum. Got it. You know, and they kind of check it off like it's no big deal. But I want them to understand it's here to stay, and here's why they should want it. There's even an organization, and I won't share names. I only share names when it's the really good stuff, but there's an organization that I know of where their business side wants to move to Agile, and the technology team is afraid. The reason is when Scrum comes into an organization, it exposes all your weaknesses, and that organization probably has a pretty controversial relationship between those 2 groups, and one is afraid to expose their weakness to the other, which is very sad, but actually quite common, I'm sure, in the industry. So, so that organization, those business side people get it, and maybe you can convince yours as well. Yes?
I've noticed that Scrum training gives you the basics on how to be functional on a team, but how do you drive the developers to drive quality and craftsmanship and maturity, you know, the long-term benefits of, so basically I'm asking, do you teach a Scrum developer class?
I don't, but we can get one here at Intertech. It's called a Certified Scrum Developer, a CSD class. And I don't have the technical skills to do that, but it's that kind of stuff. It teaches paired programming and test-driven development and all that kind of stuff. And so the Scrum Master class, they have to have that so they understand the basics of Scrum, and then you add on the 2 days for that stuff. Very important. In Scrum, we're very concerned about quality, so it's really important. Yes?
What advice would you give to a smaller department or a smaller team that has multiple products, multiple customers, can't necessarily break up into a separate team for every product?
I would try to see if we could get someone speaking on behalf of all of those customers. It kind of depends if they're inside or outside, so there's some things we'd have to sit down and talk about. But still trying to get their work to all funnel through one backlog so they can function as much as a team as possible. Now, if those are external customers, it might be a little bit harder. Internal, okay, so that business group that has all those customers in it, they're the ones that should be providing that person in that role. And they, on the business side, should be duking out all the priorities and so forth. And then they just funnel it through one backlog to the team.
And would you designate one person then to be kind of the voice of the single product owner that speaks for the whole backlog then?
Single product owner, but on the business side, not a technology person. Otherwise, we don't eliminate the finger pointing. See, in the past, it's been the business saying to technology, you guys go ahead and prioritize it. You guys figure out what you're doing. And they're actually washing their hands of it and walking away. And we need that accountability on the business side. And they might say, well, we don't have anyone who knows it all. But that's still their responsibility to prioritize the work before it comes to technology. So there's a few more questions. I'm not exactly sure how much time we have, but this guy would like to talk to you at the end.
Yes.
He's got some ideas. Okay, yes.
How do you suggest to understand or measure the maturity of your Scrum team in the maturity curve of Agile and Scrum?
Yeah, maturity is an interesting thing to be looking at. Some things that I would look at is the customer happy? Are we signing up for the right amount of work and delivering it at the end of every sprint? Are we predictable, or is our velocity, throwing out a term we haven't learned, but velocity is how much work we get done in a sprint. So is our velocity fairly stable? Are we still jumping all over? That's just a handful of things. There'd be a number of other things we could look at too, but just to get you thinking about it, those are some of the things I would look at initially. Any other questions? Yes?
I've just sort of evolved into this Agile thing, and it seems that people are using Agile to replace the waterfall, but I'm finding it seems to be an excuse to not have a project manager that knows what's going on, not have a requirement spec, not have a functional spec that's complete, not have a design that's complete, and not have a project plan that's complete.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, now, is Agile really meant to replace that, or because I can see using Agile to go from week to week to week, provided the waterfall's already done. But it seems it's an excuse to just throw all these old things away that used to be useful.
We don't use a lot of those old things that some would question whether or not they really are useful. And I know that's a whole big debate that we don't have time to get into right now. One thing is we don't say, we don't document, because we do document. We just document in a different way. We don't come up with a 30-page requirements document. We use different things. We use a product backlog and so on. We need to have an idea of an architectural diagram to know where we're headed, but things are always in draft mode because there's flexibility in Agile that we need the ability to change. We also don't have project managers in Scrum. They're replaced with somebody called a Scrum Master, but the project manager's job is divided into three. The team takes some, the product owner takes some, and the Scrum Master takes some of it. But it's not, and there's no excuse or anything. This is just what we find a better way to work. It doesn't mean waterfall has to go away. If waterfall works in an organization, why would we switch? But oftentimes it's not working. Or sometimes we'll leave it for some of the projects in-house and other projects will go Agile, and that's okay too. So an Agile isn't a one-shop-for-all kind of thing. I mean, it can work in some cases. It doesn't have to work in other cases. We don't have to bring it on board. But if we don't have an open mind to the new way of working, it's going to fail. That's a for sure.
But, there's a bug report comes in. Oh, have error systems. Okay, what's our error system? There was no error system was ever spec. And so, things like that come on the spec, like when the bug, when the bug tester calls it up, that's when things like that. In the old days, when you architected it, someone would specify an error system in the beginning, instead of when the tester says, oh, we need to start reporting this bug.
Yeah, so in our world, if the tester finds a bug, we want them to turn around and say to the developer, is this what you meant with this? Because this is working this way, and I don't think that's right. We want the conversation to replace any sort of logging the bug and taking the time, because we think that's a waste of time. We'd rather just have them collaborate.
Under waterfall, the bug system would have been in the beginning, instead of left to when a tester.
See, and in waterfall, how we measure a tester's worth is by how many bugs they find. That creates this kind of a relationship between testers and developers. So we're trying to get rid of that kind of a concept, and we don't really want to track the number of bugs we find. We want to track how good is the software and the team working together and all these other things. So it's a different idea.
Yeah, I think it works best when they don't always have a great idea what their end result is. In the business world, that's the case that I've ran into more often than not, that it's hard to do a complete project spec when you don't even know what you're trying to accomplish. So it's a better process for getting things as you go like that, but there is pieces that you still, like you said, you maybe do a sprint that is an architecture sprint where you're going to try to count.
Take some things loose.
There's a certain amount of trust there in Agile too. I mean, there's trust with a great big huge T, that if you get far enough down where you're going and you run into a piece of functionality you miss, you have to have a discussion and determine what's getting moved out in order to move that more important thing in. And it has to be a grown-up discussion, for lack of a better term. You guys have to, that's part of the reason you're talking all the time. So that
And then there's also
you're used to
concept of discovery phase. That's the phase that there's a split of time for architecting and designing and making sure we have a long-term mind in place before the stories moving to backlog and activity.
It's very common now for very basic things to be left out until the very end.
So one of the huge things that is that you're always doing the most valuable development first, and you leave the other pieces behind. Specifics are that 70% of all features are either 40% never used or 35% barely ever used. So if you think about the amount of work you put into a waterfall project, 70% of it is thrown away, you get 30% value. In the Agile process, it's something like 80 to 90% has pure value, and the rest kind of just falls down as, okay, well, we tried it, didn't work, throw it away, do something better. So instead of having a bunch of garbage on the side, you're pretty much putting pure value all the way across the board on everything you do. That's why Agile at the purest is highly valuable, because you constantly do value.
Okay, this is awesome, and I would love for the discussion to continue. You guys are great, but the big cheese is coming on next, and I got to make sure we're not over. So he won't hire me to come back if that's the case. So we need to take a little break, go ahead and get some more refreshments, and then Tom comes on at 5. So you can continue discussion out there if you'd like to. Thanks, you guys.